Welcome back to Weekend Live. Returning now to our top story, 4 people have been killed and at least 21 injured during a gun rampage in the US state of Texas. To discuss this and more, I'm now joined by Sky News contributor and visiting fellow at the US Studies Centre, Bruce Wolpe. Bruce, good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
A terribly sad day. You know, we talked only last Sunday. There's going to be another Sunday where there's a mass murder in America, and that has happened again in Texas.
It is, and it's sad. Another day, another shooting. We did discuss last week, of course, that Donald Trump, in the wake of the shootings, the 2 that we saw last month, he did say that they would look at perhaps stricter background checks. Not much progress since then, and here we are today.
Exactly. There was a lot of talk after the 2 massacres in Texas and Ohio that something might be done on gun control, starting with background checks, maybe something else. But then as August continued, they seemed to walk away from it, and there was no gelling at critical mass of the president, the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, to move legislation passed by the House or some amended version of it. And that's where things were until this morning. Now, Congress is coming back in 2 days, and so the issue will be seized again by politicians, and so there will be renewed pressure to finally do something. The vice president, you had a clip on him, he said, "My heart is broken." Well, yes, our hearts are broken, but what are you going to do about it? And you'll recall people in the streets after these massacres saying, "Do something, do something." Now, 2 other things may happen. First, at the state level, where in states where these tragedies occur, there's sometimes political action in the state legislatures to do something there. Also, you have Beto O'Rourke, the former congressman from El Paso, where the massacre was a month ago, 22 killed. He's still on the campaign trail, and he's reformulating his campaign around gun control. He's already done it in the past couple hours, issued some very impassioned statements in Texas. So these forces are converging. I still would not be optimistic, just given where the conservative leadership in the country is and in conservative leadership in Texas. But the issue is not going to go away. The killings aren't going to go away. So something ultimately has to be faced.
Absolutely, and hopefully soon, Bruce.
Hopefully soon.
Let's move on now to the US-China trade war. Today in the US, being September 1st, US time, new tariffs imposed by the US are due to come into effect. Firstly, what is expected today?
92% of all textile imports, clothing imports into the United States from China will go up by 15%. Computer equipment, telephone equipment, phones, a whole array of consumer goods, and that's going to hit consumers across the board. Farmers have already been affected, and so far they've stayed with President Trump, but there are increasing signs that their patience is wearing thin with what they can't export to China because of the tit-for-tat trade war. At the end of the week, there were communications, telephone exchanges at the deputies level between Chinese and American officials. A meeting is supposed to occur within the first 10 days of September. That will be a sign as to whether this thing got back on track, thanks to what happened in the G7 last weekend. So, short term, the costs of the trade war ramp up. President Trump does feel he's in a very strong position. But will the Chinese and Americans really get together and really say, okay, we're going to solve this thing, or is this going to go on for a while longer?
Well, as we know, it has gone on for quite a while already.
Yes.
How did this round of tariffs differ from the ones we've seen before?
More consumer goods, less targeted. So it really does affect pocketbook issues in Americans across the country, not just selected items in selected markets. And so therefore, they may see a pinch unless, retailers absorb the cost of these things and don't pass them on, but margins are thin, and so there will be some hurt associated with it. And then the question is, does that depress economic activity, retail sales, and therefore does that contribute to a slowing of the economy and more headwinds, and therefore does that ultimately have a political effect if the economy slows and the president's fortunes are tied to how well the economy is going? There's no good news short term here, but maybe everyone will realize that they really have to resolve it, or else we're going to have a deepened trade war that will really affect the economy in America and around the world.
You mentioned the impact on the farming industry, but how has industry reacted to this? How is industry coping with it?
Big business, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been in the lead saying this is really wrong, and you have to step back from the brink. It's not, the tactics employed are counterproductive, and they jeopardize the end objective of really getting some trade reform done. This isn't the way to do it. So the big business really wants the president to retreat and wants some different types of engagement with China in order to get a solution. So while people realize that the issue is important to deal with. There are increasing divergences over whether the tactics used are wise. And so the political support, which has been bipartisan for confronting China, will begin to dissipate. It's already started to dissipate. I think that will increase unless the two leaders get this back together.
Fingers crossed. We're certainly watching this one closely. Let's move on now. Let's take a look at the Democratic candidates. The field is beginning to be sorted. Take us through it.
Yes, there are still 20 candidates in the race. So, three big ones have dropped out this week. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, dropped out of the race. And the process for having debates depends on how your standing is in the polls, how many donors you have, how much money you've raised. Under those metrics, the field has narrowed from 20 participating in debates to 10. And finally, all the candidates will be on one stage a week from Friday morning here in Australia, with Joe Biden dead center, and then the two leading progressive left-wing candidates, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren on either side of him, and then a whole bunch of other candidates as well. So you're going to have all the contenders, major contenders, on one stage at one time, dealing with each other, and that should clarify the race even further a little bit. And we're still about 5 months away from the first primaries and caucuses in February.
I'm sure that will come around quite quickly. On the other side, how are we looking in terms of the Republicans?
A very interesting development. A week ago, former Congressman Joe Walsh of Illinois, a very conservative, he served one term in the House, very conservative, conservative radio talk show host, entered the race. And he's going to get his clock cleaned. He will not go anywhere. But I just took a look back over 50 years of presidential races, and where there has been a challenger to an incumbent president seeking re-election, that president has not succeeded in getting re-elected. And so those who have been unchallenged, and you have George W. Bush, you had Obama, you have Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, 2 terms. But every other president who's been challenged, you have Jimmy Carter, Jerry Ford, George H.W. Bush, they were challenged and they were not able to get a second term. And so there are no Newtonian physics here, laws of physics that apply. But it is very interesting as to what's happened. And so I'm sure President Trump feels he's absolutely in command over Joe Walsh, and he is. He will crush him. But that may not, history says, you may trip up yet as you get to next November.
History says it, so we'll see. Just finally, I just wanted to discuss the situation in regards to Hurricane Dorian. The storm is currently heading now towards the Bahamas area, where it is expected to become a category.
It could be devastating in the Bahamas.
Well, take us through it. What's been the plan so far? How is the US preparing, particularly around that area?
There's a lot of planning, and people have learned a lot over the past 25 years of really trying to hurricane management. And there have been failures in New Orleans. There was failures in Florida 25 years ago. But the Federal Emergency Management Agency team and Homeland Security and so forth, they know what they're doing. And they are well led with experienced people. So the early warnings to population zones, telling people to prepare, seek shelter, get supplies. If you're ordered to evacuate, evacuate. The course of this storm seems to be less from direct hit on Florida and more in the north of there, Georgia and the Carolinas. But because of the intensity, there's going to be a lot of flooding, a lot of rain, a lot of flooding. And that can cause a lot of damage. So hope for the best. People seem prepared. But this storm will be a major weather event over the next 5 days.
Thoughts with everyone there, and hopefully they can...
hopefully they can come through.
They can come through, absolutely. Bruce, pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tanika.